Dr. Alira Voss stepped off the transport shuttle and into the soft blue twilight of Caldor Prime. The air carried a perfume of alien flora, sweet, sharp, and oddly metallic. High above, the silver rings of the planet shimmered. It was beautiful. But Alira wasn't here to admire the skyline. The Galactic Concord's central forum rose in the distance like a glass temple, translucent domes layered in spirals, humming with the voices of 100 species. She adjusted her diplomatic badge, its holographic shimmer blinking her designation, xenopsychologist, Earth delegate. This was her 4th symposium. The first had been a blur of skeptical stares and cautious questions. The second, thin smiles and thinly veiled concern. Now? Silence wrapped in diplomacy. Every species had seen the vids, the human colonies thriving in harsh planets, the soldiers in atmospheric armor, the peaceful treaties signed by leaders who once ruled with missiles. They didn't understand humans. They didn't trust them. And maybe they were right. Alira Voss. A voice buzzed from behind. She turned. A Krugari envoy, tall, scaled, expression unreadable behind bone-plated mandibles. His voice clicked through a translator embedded in his collar. You walk alone. Unwise. Alira met his eyes. I'm not the one who should be worried. The Krugari gave a grunt, somewhere between amusement and warning, and stalked off. Inside the forum, delegates hovered in quiet clusters. Glarathi diplomats floated in their nutrient domes. The insectoid Zev clicked in nervous trills. And in the center, High Commander Varktal stood with practiced stillness, every scale polished, posture flawless, radiating disdain. Alira walked straight to the speaker's dais. The symposium's moderator, a translucent-skinned Levian, gestured. Dr. Voss, your session begins now. She tapped her datapad. The lights dimmed. A screen lit up behind her, an image of a human child standing barefoot in snow, facing a growling wolf. Alira Voss. Earth. Presentation, Pacifist Predator Psychology of Homo sapiens. Let's begin. She paced slowly, voice clear and steady. Earth evolved differently. Our species survived because we adapted to danger. We didn't become the strongest. We became the most unpredictable. A second image, a monk seated beside a tiger, both calm. Humans created peace not because it was easy, but because we understood the alternative. A low ripple of reaction stirred the chamber. Over centuries, we learned restraint. But make no mistake, every human carries instincts forged in fire and claw. Even civilians. Especially civilians. A murmur grew into open discussion. Some delegates nodded. Others narrowed their eyes. One Glarathi floated closer. Is that a threat, Dr. Voss? No, she said. It's a fact. Varktal's voice cut through. Your kind smiles in council halls while teaching children to kill in simulations. We also teach compassion. Honor. Empathy. He laughed, dry and sharp. Words. Choices, she countered. You mistake self-control for absence of danger. The chamber went silent. Alira ended the session with a final image, a human helping a wounded alien on a battlefield, shielding them with their own body. Humans don't want to be feared. But we're not here to be underestimated either. As she stepped down, an aide approached with a whisper. A Krugari patrol reported a civilian altercation in the art plaza. Her breath caught. Human? The aide nodded. Unarmed. Civilian. Her shoes tapped fast down the polished corridor. She pushed through the garden archways, heart tightening with each step. The art plaza was a quiet, open space, lined with sculptures, glowing vines, and interactive hollow art. A place meant for reflection. And there, under the crimson-leafed Altheran tree, a human lay on the stone path. Face bloodied. Nose broken. One eye swollen shut. A Krugari soldier stood over him, claws slick. No weapon in sight. But none needed. Around them, a ring of aliens watched, silent, disturbed, recording. Alira shoved through and knelt beside the man. He coughed once. Blood hit the tiles. "Name?" she asked. He grinned, one tooth missing. "Marcus Hale. Sculptor. Bad at ducking." Alira turned to the Krugari. "Explain yourself." The soldier's mandibles flexed. He insulted the Dominion. By sculpting a dove? It looked Krugari. "You attacked him for art?" Varktal appeared then, slow and deliberate. "Your people are volatile, Dr. Voss. This is proof. You staged this." "Did I?" he said smoothly. "I merely let a Krugari patrol observe how easily a human breaks." Alira stood, voice low. "You didn't see him break. You saw him hold back." Varktal tilted his head. "Interesting interpretation." She turned to Marcus. "You didn't defend yourself?" "I did," he said. "In the only way that mattered. I didn't become what he wanted." Alira helped him to his feet. He leaned on her, unsteady but proud. "You'll regret this," she told Varktal. The Krugari narrowed his gaze. "That's the plan." That night, Alira reviewed the surveillance footage. The soldier had goaded Marcus for 20 minutes. Accused. Insulted. Finally, attacked. Marcus hadn't thrown a single punch. But his smile, bloody and cold, at the end? It had unsettled even her. She paused the feed. There was something in his eyes. Something old. Not rage. Control. Barely. And that was worse. Outside her window, Kaldor's moons rose in silence. Alira stared at her reflection in the glass. Something was coming. Not from humans. From the fear others would feel when they finally understood what humans really were. And what they'd spent millennia trying not to be. The footage was silent. No music. No narration. Just raw, wide-angle security feed. Marcus Hale stood barefoot in the plaza, sculpting with his hands and hollow tools. His work glowed, smooth wings stretching skyward, light weaving through translucent feathers. A dove, caught mid-flight. Symbol of peace. Then the Krugari soldier entered the frame. 6 minutes of taunting. No reaction. 12 minutes of posturing. No movement. At 19 minutes, the soldier struck. Alira watched the blow connect, an open palm slash to the face. Bone cracked. Marcus dropped. Blood on stone. He didn't fight back. Not then. The soldier raised his arm again. Marcus caught it. One motion. No flourish. No warning. The Krugari's body jerked, shoulder dislocated, mandibles splitting in shock. The human moved fast. Not wildly. Precisely. No wasted effort. No scream. 2 knees to the thorax. Elbow to the jaw hinge. Leg sweep. The Krugari collapsed. Twitching. Marcus stood. Swayed. Then sat beside his sculpture and bled quietly. The footage ended. Alira paused the display. She didn't blink. Didn't breathe. "He warned you," she said aloud. The silence in the review chamber was absolute. 17 species sat in observation, all waiting for her analysis. Varktal loomed across the table, armored, smug. "Well, Dr. Voss," he said. "Do you call that restraint?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "Ridiculous. Your so-called civilian disabled a trained Krugari elite." Alira turned the screen again. He waited 19 minutes. He gave ground. He absorbed damage. He neutralized, not destroyed. The Glarathi diplomat buzzed. "Still, he's dangerous." "So's your own soldier," Alira said, tone razor-sharp. "And he initiated violence on neutral soil." The room stirred. Varktal stepped forward. You're hiding something, human. That man, he's no sculptor. She didn't blink. His service record is sealed. Classified. But yes, he has a past. A murmur broke out. The word classified echoed with tension. He is now a civilian. Retired. And he chose peace. Until peace chose to bleed. Humans cannot hide behind civility forever, Varktal growled. This was your moment to show your truth. I think we did, she said. Later, Alira visited Marcus in the med bay. The room was dim, sterile, scented faintly of ozone and antiseptic. He lay on the reclined bed, nose reset, eye patched. Awake. You caused a stir, she said. I sneezed on his ego, Marcus replied. Alira chuckled softly, but the weight remained. They're calling you a threat. Because I stopped a beating? Because you stopped it too well. He exhaled. I pulled every hit. You know that, right? She nodded. You had suppression implants. Still do. Adrenaline limiters, neuromuscular dampeners. I was operating at 30%. You still dismantled a Krugari enforcer in seconds. Marcus leaned back. I didn't want to. But instincts don't always ask permission. She looked at him carefully. Are you afraid of what's coming? He shook his head. I'm afraid they'll never understand we're trying. The next morning, the Concord convened for an emergency hearing. Alira stood before the assembly again. Her voice was colder now. More precise. You think Marcus Hale is the exception. He is not. He is the example. Humans who've seen too much and chose to put the knife down. But if you force their hand. Varktal interrupted. You keep repeating that humans choose peace. Perhaps that's the problem. Other species don't need to choose it. It simply is their nature. She smiled grimly. And that's why you don't survive your own wars. A flash of silence, deep and sudden. Alira paced slowly. You look at humans and see chaos wrapped in skin. But what you don't understand is that chaos forged discipline. That rage bred control. We earned our civility. The Glarafi leaned forward. But your instincts, can they be trusted? She turned to face him directly. No. They're managed. By choice. By training. By culture. Every day, every generation. That is harder than peace born of ease. The Levian moderator raised a hand. Enough. The council will deliberate. Outside, under Caldor Prime's silver sky, the alien press gathered. Dozens of eyes, tentacles, or lenses blinked at her. Dr. Voss, is it true Earth civilians are former soldiers? Is Marcus Hale going to be deported? Should aliens be afraid? Alira stopped walking. Turned. You should be respectful, she said. Not because we demand it. But because we try very hard not to become what we evolved to be. She walked away before more questions followed. That night, Marcus's sculpture was removed. Not for damage. For symbolism. A dove, mid-flight, torn from its place. Alira stared at the empty pedestal for a long time. Then she whispered, almost to herself. They wanted the monster. They almost got it. The Concord Tribunal chamber pulsed with tension. 36 delegates sat in a perfect arc, their features illuminated by the blue glow of judicial light. Behind them, millions across the galaxy tuned in. Every screen carried the banner. Emergency hearing, species, Homo sapiens, status review, threat assessment. Alira Voss stood alone at the center. She didn't flinch. High Commander Varktal sat upright on his platform, rigid as stone, eyes narrowed. His claws tapped rhythmically on the edge of the table, impatient. Waiting for the blow to land. It wouldn't. Alira keyed her datapad. A timeline appeared behind her. It began 10,000 years ago. Before you decide what humanity is, I'd like to show you who we were. The first image, a sharpened stick held in a primate's hand. We were prey. Then, we weren't. A flash of ice ages, fire, famine, then iron and steel. Cities rising. Towers falling. War. Peace. War again. She walked slowly, voice calm. We did not inherit our planet through benevolence. We fought for it, sometimes with honor, sometimes without. We destroyed forests, broke mountains, split atoms. And when we finally realized the cost, we began to rebuild. Another slide, an Earth child handing food to a limbless robotic refugee. We learned. Slowly. Painfully. But we learned. The Zev delegate clicked softly. And yet your instincts remain violent. Yes, Elira said. But unlike instinct-driven species, we developed something you didn't. She paused. Control. Varktal leaned forward. Control is not enough. A caged predator is still a predator. You misunderstand, she said, steady. We are not caged. We are disciplined. And that discipline is what terrifies you. Another image, Marcus Hale, sitting bloodied beside his sculpture. Arms resting, not clenched. Eyes open, not wild. This man was beaten publicly, insulted repeatedly, provoked relentlessly. He responded with restraint. Tactical, defensive force. Not vengeance. He didn't kill. He didn't escalate. Varktal scoffed. He incapacitated a Krugari enforcer. At 30% capacity, Elira snapped, then softened. He was trained for war. But he chose art. The chamber buzzed with murmurs. Elira raised her voice just enough. We are the only species here who had to evolve both as predator and civilizer. We had to survive ourselves before we could ever survive each other. The Levian moderator tilted his translucent head. What would happen if a human ever stopped choosing restraint? Elira looked him dead in the eyes. You'd never ask that question again. Silence. Absolute. Not fear, understanding. That was worse. In the days that followed, the tribunal deliberated. Protests sparked on fringe colonies. Some called for Earth's expulsion. Others demanded Marcus Hale be tried off-world. Inside a quiet chamber, Elira met with Marcus again. He stared out the window. His bruises had faded, but his posture hadn't relaxed. They want to make me a warning, he said. She nodded. They already did. He smirked without humor. Funny. All I did was survive a beating. No, she said. You proved the galaxy's worst fear. That we're dangerous? That we're dangerous and don't need weapons to prove it. He turned toward her. You think they'll accept us now? They won't have a choice. 3 days later, the verdict came. The Concord would not ban humans. Instead, they would revise the species classification. Homo sapiens, apex-class civilian threat, engage with caution. Behavioral rating, controlled predatory instinct, CPI-3. A first in Concord history. No other species had ever been labeled both peaceful and predatory. Elira stood in the diplomatic hall when the announcement was made. She watched alien delegates murmur. Some nodded. A few looked away. Varktal was gone. No formal protest. No grand display. Just absence. He had lost. Not in words. In understanding. That evening, Elira received a private message. Anonymous sender. Untraceable relay. A single sentence. Earth is a sleeping knife. You taught them to leave it sheathed. For now. She deleted it. Then walked back to the art plaza. The sculpture had been returned. Cleaned. Repaired. Restored. The dove still rose, wings spread wide. But now, beneath it, carved carefully in 2 languages, Galactic Standard and English. We chose peace. You should be glad we did. Elira stood in the quiet, hands folded behind her back. No security. No weapon. She didn't need one. Marcus Hale stood under artificial starlight, carving a new piece. This one wasn't a dove. His fingers moved slower now, more deliberate, forming a human silhouette seated with its back turned, spine arched just enough to suggest tension, held, not released. The figure's hands were clasped behind its head, hiding its face. It wasn't surrender. It was suppression. Elira watched from a distance, hands tucked into her coat. The plaza was empty except for the occasional flicker of curious onlookers. No guards. No press. Just one human and one memory that wouldn't leave the galaxy alone. I thought you'd sculpt something lighter, she said as she approached. Marcus didn't look up. I don't make pretty things. I make truth. She stepped beside him, careful not to cast a shadow on his work. Truth can be terrifying. Only when people see it too late. His words landed heavier than she expected. Concord requested your presence again, she said. Private panel. Closed discussion. Why? They want to understand us better. Or control us. Maybe both. He wiped dust from the sculpture's shoulder. I'm not sure they'll ever know the difference. The meeting room was smaller than the tribunal chamber, less ceremonial and more surgical. 7 species sat at the table. Scientists, not diplomats. 2 recorded vitals. 1 monitored emotional fluctuations. 1 blinked ultraviolet lenses at Marcus like he was a specimen, not a man. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Unimpressed. Elira stood at his side, arms folded. A Zev linguist chirped. Human Marcus, describe your thought process before you engage the Krugari. I didn't want to. Then why proceed? Because I wanted to live. Did you experience pleasure in the act? His face hardened. No. I hated it. But you were efficient. I was trained to be. The room fell quiet. A Levian psychologist spoke next. Would you say your species enjoys violence? Marcus glanced at Elira. Can I answer honestly? Yes, she said. He turned back. Some do. Most don't. But we're all capable of it. Every single one of us. The only difference is how far we're pushed. The Glarathi scribe floated closer. And what do you fear, human Marcus? He didn't hesitate. Losing the ability to stop. The translator buzzed, but no one spoke. They didn't need to. The weight was understood across every language. Back on the transport, Elira sat across from him in silence. The stars beyond the window blurred into silver trails. They wanted reassurance, she finally said. They got a warning. They won't like that. They shouldn't. Elira tapped her finger against the armrest. I've spent years studying non-human behavior. Cultures. Customs. I tried so hard to make us fit into their boxes. And? They've never met anything like us. Marcus exhaled through his nose. Because everything we are, came with scars. She looked out the window. We're aliens to them. And we always will be. 3 days later, a delegation from the Krugari Dominion sent a formal message. Not an apology. A request. They wanted Marcus Hale to visit Krugari Prime. Not for trial. For observation. Education. Quiet fear disguised as curiosity. Elira stared at the message in her office, rereading the last line. We believe your kind may hold the key to surviving ourselves. She forwarded it to Marcus without a comment. 10 minutes later, he replied. Tell them I'll come. But I won't perform. She smiled. On the edge of the Concord Gardens, Elira met with the Levian moderator one final time before her departure back to Earth. He studied her carefully, translucent skin shifting with emotion. You believe this chapter is over? No, she said. But they've seen under the skin now. That's a start. He tilted his head. You've walked a delicate line, Dr. Voss. Many of your species wouldn't have stayed composed. They haven't had to yet. And if they do? She gave a tired smile. Let's all hope it never comes to that. He hesitated. There's a phrase you humans use. Something about awakening forces? Her smile faded. Don't wake the sleeping wolf. He nodded. Wise. But tell me, how do you tame a wolf that walks like a man? You don't, she said. You learn to walk beside it. Later, as her shuttle left Caldor Prime's atmosphere, Alira finally allowed herself to relax. For now, at least. She thought of Marcus's sculpture. The man with his face hidden, shoulders coiled. Tension without release. A mirror of what humanity was. A species not proud of its power, but aware of it. Not peaceful by design, but peaceful by discipline. And in a galaxy of civilizations who evolved past violence, maybe the most terrifying truth was this. Humanity hadn't. They just learned to carry it better.